After a total security blackout, the 1st Canadian Corps moved from Italy to the Western Theater of Operations. Now the story of the Great Migration can be told. All formation signs and identification marks are removed from men and vehicles for security reasons. Leaving the 8th Army, they reach the port of embarkation in Leghorn, Italy. Here the tedious business of loading transport for the whole Corps progresses rapidly. It's old stuff to the veterans of the 1st and 5th Div. They have loaded their equipment on shipboard so many times, they can do it in their sleep. Their old friend, Field Marshal Montgomery, drives out to meet them. Their old CO of the 8th Army and their new commander of 21st Army Group greets them as one veteran warrior to his pals. The whole great movement is completed in an unbelievably short time. 4 days for the trip through Italy, 24 hours on the water, and 5 days on the road to Holland. Now the 1st Canadian Corps joins the 2nd to add their force to the final blow.
So where are we heading now?
We are going into the most exclusive shopping street of Amsterdam. It's not a big, huge street like Fifth Avenue in New York City
or Boulevard Haussmann. Or...
Yeah, but it's funny. Everybody tries to park his car always there.
This whole odyssey started more than 65 years ago when Hitler invaded Europe. I know that sounds melodramatic, but what happened was that Canada, of course, declared war immediately after Hitler invaded Poland, and not much, a couple of months later, invaded Holland and totally occupied it. And I think on September 10th, 1939, they declared war on Hitler's Germany and I guess the Axis power of Italy. The Canadian government, when the Nazis invaded Holland in May of 1940, they took part of the royal family to Canada, and Princess Marguerite was actually born in an Ottawa hospital, and in order to keep her royal bloodline, the Canadian government even declared the hospital grounds as a tiny piece of Holland, so that she would have been born in Holland, and they've never forgotten that, and the royal family has insisted ever since that they send thousands of tulip bulbs to Canada, to Ottawa in particular, to thank Canadians for their kindnesses during the Second World War. My dad didn't sign up right away, but a couple of years into the war, he, like a lot of other Canadians, even though they weren't conscripted, decided that they would sign up and go overseas. And I asked him one time, he wouldn't talk much about the war, and I wish he had talked more about it, and I wish I had asked more questions, more probing questions, because he's gone now, but I did ask him at one point why he decided to sign up when he didn't have to go, especially since he was a little older than the average Canadian signing up for overseas duty. He was about 27, I think, and he was married with one child, and before he was shipped out, there was another child on the way, and you wouldn't think that somebody with 2 children married and of that age would even be accepted, but he was. He was needed in regimental headquarters. He joined the 19th Field Regiment and ended up as orderly room sergeant in their headquarters, which might sound as though he was behind the lines, but actually the regimental headquarters was wherever the regiment was, and the 19th Field Regiment actually saw battle on D-Day. He went in on D-Day. He saw his best friend, Murray Kirby from Oshawa, Ontario, killed on the beach and had to just keep on going. And he fought through northern France and into Belgium and then Holland. This whole trip that we've taken to Holland resulted from him being billeted in they called it the Hunger Winter. It was the coldest winter in decades, if not a century, in Europe, the winter of 1944-45. And the 19th Field Regiment battled through northern France, as they say, and into Belgium and then into Holland, and they were pulled out of action for a couple of weeks, as I understand it. Apparently they were given a chance to rest for a bit in a little town called Horsen by Nijmegen, right on the Vaal River, and that was in, I think, around October 1944, or even a little later in the year. And he was billeted with a lot of the Dutch people, of course, took the Canadians into their own homes, partly because they were so grateful that the Canadians had literally saved the Dutch population from starving at the hands of the Nazis, who were taking terrible reprisals for the resistance that the Dutch people had put up during the occupation. And the Canadians, when it was pretty obvious that the war was over, and the Canadians decided that they had to do something about saving these starving Dutchmen. They were told that by the underground people and so on, by spies, that the Dutch were literally starving to death. There were thousands of them dying, and there were many hundreds being hanged from lampposts and so on as reprisals for, in retaliation for the underground's shooting of Nazi officers and whatnot, or some acts of sabotage. So anyway, they were very grateful that the Canadians had told the German High Command. They called a truce and said, look, we know you're starving these people. You know you're going to lose the war. If you don't let us bring food to these starving people, then you will all be tried as war criminals after the war. So they agreed that they would cease firing and on both sides, and the Canadians dropped supplies from any available aircraft, mostly Lancaster bombers, as I understand it, and trucked food in as well through the German lines, and literally saved the Dutch people from starving, and so they've never forgotten that. In the cold winter, the bitter winter, the hunger winter is what the Dutch called it, because there was such an era of deprivation and starvation that they were going through, that when the Canadians came to this little town, this little village of Horsen, when my dad was billeted with a guy named Max Kopus, and he had 3 sons and a daughter on the way. And my dad spent about 2 weeks there, as I can understand it. I wish I knew more about it, but my dad and mother are gone, and so was Max Kopus and his wife, so it's second and third hand information we hear. But from what I understand, and I couldn't get my dad to say too much about it, he stayed with them for about 2 weeks until they had to go on and towards the push into Germany. I started my career as an elementary school teacher back in my hometown of Sault Ste. Marie, and when I managed to secure a position teaching with the Canadian forces overseas, my dad said, well, you're going to Europe, don't come back unless you've talked to my good friend Maximilianus Wilhelmus Kopus. It was a sacred trust, I had to do it. So that was an assignment I had to keep, and at the end of my teaching time in 1963, I found the little village of Horsen and drove up unannounced and found the Kopus shop and went in, and the person who was there turned out to be Max Kopus. And I walked up to him and I asked if he was Max Kopus, and he was rather suspicious, and he said yes, or yeah. And there was another person in the 19th Field Regiment, a gunner named Douglas, who was killed, and word filtered back to the Dutch community that that Douglas had been killed, and the Copuses thought it was him. And only when I showed up again in 1963, 18 years later, did they realize that my father was still alive. I had tried to explain to them who I was, and until we got a student over to help translate, they thought that I was a German salesman because I was trying my high school German on them because I didn't speak Dutch, and they didn't understand English. Max didn't. I found out that I would be going over to Holland for the 60th anniversary of the liberation as an accredited journalist with the Canadian government. And so I had a friend that I had made just via the email, via the internet, a guy named Jan Bos, who's a policeman in Leersum, Holland. He found the Copus family for me. I'd lost touch with them, and so I wrote. He got an email address, and I wrote and heard back from the grandson of Max Copus, who said that his family would be happy to see me again. So I took a day during the 60th liberation ceremonies, rented a car, and drove to Horsen, and spent another really wonderful day meeting with them. And I wrote a story about it, and at the end of the story I suggested it would be a great thing if there was another generation to meet, being Mies is the daughter that I visited this in May of 2005, and it was suggested that her son Jan Peter, Ye as they call him, and my son James could possibly meet, and so I started trying to cook up a way to make that happen. So the Netherlands Board of Tourism and Conventions, Bianca Halderman out of New York City, I wrote her and I sent her a number of the clippings of stories I had filed in during the 60th liberation, and on the strength of that, and I pitched this idea of a third generation reunion. And on the strength of that, we went down to see the Copuses again. And when I say down, we were based in Amsterdam, and went down to Horsen again. And this time, there was a fellow, a Dutch militia person he actually owns his own World War II Jeep. His name is Mark Hodeman, and he drove us down to Horsen in this Jeep. We could only go about 40 miles an hour, so it was a long trek. In December, with no doors or windows on the Jeep, just a canvas top, but he had the foresight to bring some army blankets, and we made it okay, and had another great party with the Copus family. The Keukenhof Gardens were for about 6 weeks, I guess, 2 months, 6 weeks in the spring every year. It's the greatest show on earth. It's acres and acres and acres of various colored tulips and various varieties and so on. We had the very unique experience of being allowed into the Keukenhof Gardens during the off-season. It's their planting season, and they were planting all the bulbs, and they plant them in various patterns so that they will have various colors during the height of the season. And we learned quite a bit about how they go about cultivating them, and there are certain ones that you can buy in the markets all over Holland, and they have to be certified that you can buy them, you can plant them without any fear of disease or whatever in the United States and Canada. But there's a very special breed that will flourish in Canada without causing any damage to other botanical products. We also learned that there has to be about 12 weeks of cold weather after they're planted, and this is why the fellow at the Tulip Museum, who also sells them, commercially all over the world. He has a catalog and he sends them all over the world. He won't sell them to people from hot countries because he said they won't flourish there. You can refrigerate them and then plant them if you're in a country like Mexico, for instance, or even, I guess, Southern California. But they'll only bloom for a year and then they die because it's not normal for them to flourish in a country that doesn't have a cold spell for about 12 weeks. So there are special kinds. He said, he was telling us that there are certain ones that he will send to certain countries because he knows that they will do well in those particular countries. We learned in the Tulip Museum here, it's just a brand new museum and it's one I recommend because it's very small. They sell bulbs upstairs and they downstairs there's a small museum with lots of beautiful pictures and old utensils used for doing tulip bulb cultivation and so on. Of course, the tulip is native to Holland. It is native to Europe, for that matter. It came from the Himalayan area and Central Asia. In the museum, which within 10 minutes of looking at the material there, you've learned things that you didn't realize about the tulip. For instance, the tulip is a misnomer. When the tulip was first introduced into Europe in the early 1600s, apparently by Austrians going to Turkey, it had come that far from Central Asia to Turkey, and it was flourishing there. And the old ones apparently were very spiked. The petals were high spikes, and then there was the bloom itself. But according to this legend that we read about in the Tulip Museum, someone asked, what do you call these things? And the Turks called them something like lale or something, which is like a lily, which probably the reason why it's from the lily family. But apparently the Turks misunderstood what they were saying, and they said, they thought they were saying, what does this look like? And they said, it looks like an upturned turban, an upside down turban. And the word for turban, apparently in ancient Turkish, was sound very much like tulip. And so therefore, the tulip is a word that really is derived from the word for turban. I was trying to find a real theme for this whole journey that we've packed in so much in the last 5 days that the trip to visit the Copus family. We visited the Rembrandt Huis Museum and the Van Gogh Museum and Keukenhof Gardens, and a brief visit to the Rijksmuseum and a canal cruise and so on. We've packed all this in and we've taken a half-day tour with a very, very knowledgeable and informative guide. And I was trying to think of some symbolic theme of this whole inter-country relationship that has built up since the Second World War. And the tulip, is an obvious symbol, and so we've done a bit of study of the tulip and why it is a good symbol of the relationship between Canada and Holland is that Holland sends tulips to Canada every year in thanks for the various things Canada has done for Holland, including the billeting of the royal family during the Second World War and Princess Marguerite's birth in Ottawa, and the liberation and whatnot. And there are close ties anyway because of the many immigrants from Holland that have settled in Canada, and so it made sense that we would concentrate on the tulip for this trip because they literally from the ashes that Holland was during the 40s because of the Nazi takeover, and Canada helping with the rebirth. It's kind of symbolic that the tulip is a perennial and will keep coming back to remind us of the close relationship between the two countries. This is all sort of part and parcel of the close relationship between Canada and Holland. Of course, Canadians, including my father and James's grandfather, was one of the liberators in '44. That's how he met the Copus family. So the tulip is sort of the the linchpin of this whole story that we're trying to tell. It's amazing the number of tentacles that have gone out with various meeting various people, all because I wanted to keep up this relationship that my father started over 60 years ago with Max Copas. And there's been a number of people who have made this happen, and I imagine we'll stay in fairly close touch, and it's a great little relationship to keep going. And I often wonder what Max and Sergeant Mel Douglas, my dad, would think if they could, and who knows where they could be at the moment, but if they're sitting and having a drink together, a beer together, as they did 60-some years ago, they're probably getting a big kick out of this continued relationship that started just because of happenstance in the hunger winter of 1944. That's enough.